I have been on pins and needles, guys, ever since I heard about your project from Bill to find out more about it. So tell me more about it. You're working on a documentary, Room 237 is what you're calling it?
Yeah, that's the working title right now. And yeah, I mean, the idea of it is to sort of explore, as many of sort of allegorical readings of The Shining as we can find. So we're going over, different Kubrick books and film reviews and blog postings, and it's kind of crazy because I remember reading. There was a lot about The Shining in Thomas Allen Nelson's book, Kubrick Inside a Film Artist's Maze, and he finds stuff in there that I never noticed. And it was only recently, the last 6 or 8 months, I think, where me and Tim have started researching this. And just, I guess because of the internet, there's so much more stuff out there now, and just trying to, get our heads around it in bullet points of, different people with interesting things to say. I mean, I'm sure as you guys must be experiencing right now with your podcasts.
Yeah.
There are a lot of theories out there, and what we're finding is really interesting is a lot of them bounce off the same points from the film, which is where we're getting our title, The Room 237, because a lot of people have a lot to say about that number 237 and Kubrick's involvement with it.
Yeah,
certainly like 237, even the number 237 in the book, it was 217. So people, as they compare the book and the movie, anything they see changed, and oh my God, almost everything has been changed. But everything must have been changed, for a reason. And if something as simple as a number has changed, then there has to be a lot behind it.
Well, you know what Kubrick says about the change, though, of the room number?
Yeah, I do, though. I'm maybe not the only person who's skeptical about that.
I know. I understand. Yes. It is, but just for the benefit of our audience that might not know, Kubrick said that Room 217 was used in the book. The actual hotel that they based their hotel on in the film didn't want to be bombarded with people wanting 217, so they used a room number that does not exist in the hotel, Room 237. Am I right about that?
Yeah, no, that's what I've heard too, and that may be exactly what happened. But I mean, Kubrick is also someone who's notoriously
cryptic. Yeah.
Cryptic, and if the number had a lot of meaning, he would never come right out and say it. So
no, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about The Shining, then your mind does go to mysteries and hidden meanings and keys to puzzles. And so 237, is definitely one of those that pops up in many of the theories that we've looked at.
No, we just rewatched the film about a week ago, and the scene of Jack in 237 in particular is kind of confusing, like just what's happening.
The thing we were struck with the sequence was that it begins with Halloran sort of channeling what's going on with Danny, and we see Danny shaking in a room, and then we see sort of Danny's perspective of what's happening in 237, and suddenly it's
it's literally a point of view shot, so he's viewing it through Jack's eyes. And the way the thing is cut is really confusing, and confusing, and I think in a really fascinating way that sticks with you, because you see him, he has the encounter with the young woman and then the old woman, but right after the young woman is turned into that hag, sort of continuity is broken, and we cut to her like sinking into the tub. Mm-hmm. So that it's a big jump cut, and the question is that a vision of her drowning, so many years ago back in the hotel, or is that what Danny saw when he walked into the room earlier? So with with one simple cut from the two shot of Jack and the woman, in the bathroom to her in the tub, time is confused and fractured, and whose point of view we're seeing what from becomes very mysterious and enigmatic really, really quickly.
Have you heard any takes? Have you heard any takes on what the young/old woman means? Yes.
Oh, we've read a few. You know, we're just moving right now from our research into our interviews, so we don't have a ton of them laid down. Mm-hmm. But certainly, well, I mean, there's the idea from the book where, I mean, that character actually had a name, and I think she had committed suicide in the pool, in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, do you remember what some of the ideas about the young woman in the hag were?
I know there's some Gemini duality theory out there. I'm actually looking through my notes right now, trying to see if I could find.
And Kubrick was actually obsessed with themes of duality.
Say in The Shining, in particular, there's so many characters are doubled. There's so many doppelgangers, from Jack in the present day to Jack in the photo to Grady's, Delbert and Charles, the twin sisters, and there are theories that connect actually Danny and the mother to the twin girls. There was this amazing diagram somebody drew of like sort of a shot of the back of Danny on the big wheel and how much it looked like one of the dresses that the girls wear. That there are characters linked. And gosh, so many of the scenes are shot through mirrors.
Right. And how in the scene with Grady in the bathroom, how they're not quite, obviously they're surrounded by mirrors and they're not quite looking at each other.
Yeah, and there's an interesting jump cut in the bathroom scene that's been remarked upon, where it's kind of on one shot we see, it's a profile shot, and we see Jack and Grady facing each other, and then maybe what's not super unusual for Kubrick, but it's kind of a weird cut from other people's standards, is like the 180 flip where the camera is on the other side of the room. Mm-hmm. So Jack and Grady literally change places. And as they talk about, you're the caretaker, no, you're the caretaker, was kind of fascinating because their screen position switches.
God, I love this movie. Seriously, I do. And tell me about. Let's talk about one theory that we've discussed with Bill Blakemore, and you guys have obviously had correspondence with him on this as well. And it's obvious that the film has a streak of or that character has a streak of racism in it. He's obviously commenting or portraying racism on some level. But Mr. Blakemore's theory, and I've heard others echo this, is the idea that the film is actually about the genocide of the American Indian. Is this something that you guys are exploring and finding more and more examples of?
Oh, well, absolutely. Bill is, one of the a major person, that we're speaking to in the film, and got his insight into the film is pretty amazing. Tim?
The amazing thing about Bill's theory is that he wrote this in 1987, and people are still discussing it. And watching the film with Rodney just the other night, it's the first time I've actually revisited it since we started talking with Bill, and it was really difficult not to see a lot of the themes that he's talking about in the film. Though they had not jumped out at me initially. Though when I first read his article, I did immediately flash to the business where Ullman's showing Wendy and Danny around and talking about the Indian. There may have been an Indian uprising while they were building the overlook. So yeah, it's a really interesting theory, and And I imagine you guys had a very good conversation about it.
Well, and it extends into the marketing of the film as well, as Mr. Blakemore discussed. Even the tagline on the poster, the wave of terror that swept across the nation is here. The poster that was released, months before the actual movie came out. Yeah. And the U.S. gets a longer version. We got our own version. Yeah.
Well, and I love the way he talked about the music that plays, over the opening scene of the car driving through the mountains, and those wails that you hear that always send shivers, up the back of my spine.
Almost sound like Indian chants.
Yeah, well, that's how I'd never heard that, but when he places it there, I can totally feel that, and especially in that, great Western landscape. It's pretty powerful.
So, do you find that when you latch on to another theory, you find another theory, you kind of have to look at the movie with fresh eyes and in that frame of mind? Okay, I'm looking for this now. I mean, how many times have you guys revisited the movie, exploring these different themes?
We talk about this pretty much every time we talk, and noodle around it and come at it from different angles and throw questions at each other and try and make meld some of these theories, which is just fascinating and endless, and I don't think we're alone in that. We've been corresponding with Bill, and I know you've been involved in these email exchanges as well, Jamie, where he and his friend Richard clearly spend a great deal of time, or when they do talk about it, they get real deep real fast.
I found that it's very surprising because of all the movies that we're covering with Kubrick, I thought that 2001 would be the most cryptic and open for interpretation, or Eyes Wide Shut. And Eyes Wide Shut is proving to be a challenge to kind of decipher with some of these guests we've had, but none more so than The Shining. I mean, there are so many varying interpretations. Is it about the horrors of writer's block? Is it about genocide? And this theory, I'm sure you guys have found it. It's one of the most popular and kind of joked about on the internet about The Shining, which is the faked Apollo moon landing theory of Jay Widener's.
No, I find his idea really fascinating. I think for me, there's a point when I read any of them, and they're sort of cumulative. And by the time somebody has a half a dozen or more correspondences, between their reading and what's in the film, it starts to get a real weight and become more and more persuasive. And Jay, like a lot of folks, has got a lot of little details in there that add up.
Very specific examples that illustrate his points. Yeah, it's hard to argue once you read, because he's so specific about his explanation for Room 237 is the distance between the Earth and the Moon.
137,000 miles. Yeah.
Yes.
and the rocket on his jersey, climbing up in the frame. You see, and that's a theory that I think he only wrote it like less than a year ago, which for us is a really significant that this film that's 30 years old now is still being talked about and picked about, and it isn't it isn't that everything was said and done about it in the year after it was created. Like I teach editing at a film school here in California, and it's interesting because I show the kids scenes from 2001, which is an incredibly important film to me, and they're not super into it. They say, oh, yeah, the bone turns into a spaceship, we get it. But they've all seen, and they're all fascinated by The Shining, kids 19 to early 20s. That film has a real power with them.
Also, because I found that with The Shining, out of all of Kubrick's movies, it's the one that works the best strictly as a genre film. You can appreciate The Shining just as you would an exceptional horror movie on that same level. But then you realize that there's so many more deeper levels here, and I think that's what we're discovering as people get older. I was so young when I first watched The Shining, and as the years pass and I revisit it, I'm more receptive to those ideas coming off the screen than I was when I first saw it. But knowing Kubrick, I think that all of the speculation is not a bunch of hot air, because he thrived on ambiguity. I mean, there are hidden messages in all of his films, I think.
Yeah, well, there are hidden messages, and ambiguity is a really key word. That there are a lot of things that aren't fully explained in the film. In the text of the film itself. When I saw The Sixth Sense, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, which it's a pretty good little movie, but there was a point in it when we find out what the relationship of the ghosts to the kid are, and what the kid's mission is in relation to the ghosts, and at that very instant, the movie is no longer scary or mysterious. It all, and I stick with it to the end. But the whole cloud, like the first section of that movie, is actually very scary. But once that mystery is completely solved, all my tension left, in my and I became a little bit less engaged.
Yes.
Whereas Kubrick never really answers the mystery in The Shining, which is, I think, part of the reason we keep returning to it, now 30 years later.
Well, let me ask you this, Tim, because just this past weekend we spoke to Tony Fruin, Kubrick's assistant for many, many years, and I actually asked him. I said, everyone has theories about what Kubrick's films meant, and he was very cagey about discussing them, and I'm thankful for that, because if he was explicit in his explanation of what these movies meant, then they wouldn't survive as long as they have, I don't think. But I said, are we all crazy? Are we making up stuff, or is it a bunch of hot air? And he said no. Kubrick loved the fact that people took these films into their hearts and minds, and it meant something personal for everyone. But did you ever think, Tim, that all these theories are a bunch of hot air, or did you always know that there was meat to them, there was something there? To
return to a point that Rodney made earlier, there's a tipping point for me when we come upon these theories where there's an accumulation of evidence or observations or whatever you want to call it that the authors have found in the film, where I go, whoa, maybe this is real. And I like hearing that Tony told you that, because it makes me smile to think that Kubrick was getting a chuckle or enjoying the fact that we're all sort of wandering in this maze of a film he made. And as many people have pointed out, the maze is one of the central images of The Shining. Someone even pointed out that Kubrick's production company, at one time not, when he was making The Shining, was named Minotaur. And of course the maze doesn't exist in the book. It was these topiary animals that came to life. So, this is something that Kubrick intentionally brought to the film. And I would agree it's probably one of the central allegorical themes of the film.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a particular shot. This is the most talked about and argued single shot. It lasts for maybe 4 or 5 seconds on screen.
I think I know where you're going.
I think I know too.
It's the some people say it's when Wendy experiences her own Shining and sees the kind of a rich aristocratic guy in a tuxedo on a bed, and some people say in a bear costume, some people say in a pig costume, performing an act on that man.
Earth.
What does it mean? I guess is my question.
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of I like that scene in particular. I'm just embarking on rereading the book. I believe that scene is explained in the book. And that it's one of the things that happened at that crazy part that in the book it was a costume party in 1945, not a July 4th party in the 20s. And what's interesting is like how many things that aren't in the book are sort of in the movie, but with sort of the connection severed. Like there's the scrapbook that tells the history of the Overlook Hotel, which is incredibly important in the book, and it's a world that Jack is exploring, and it's kind of suggested that what he's actually writing is the history of the hotel, and that the scrapbook is a huge piece of research for him. But in the movie, it's never talked about, and it never even gets a close-up. But there's a shot where it's heavily in the foreground while Jack is having his confrontation with Wendy when she disturbs him at the writing table. That's not a huge story about what it means. What it is arguably a vision of like the height of decadence. In the hotel's past. Depending on the theory that you're going with, the bear can represent. There's a Cold War reading where the recurrence of bears throughout the movie are talking about the Soviet Union and the Cold War.
Yeah, Jay Wiedner, in his
was that Jay?
In his theory, yeah, he finds that the bear represents the Russian bear, and symbolizes the Cold War that was driving the creation of the Apollo space program.
Huh.
And there's another theory that talks a lot about sort of Jack's sexuality. So I don't know if this dot has been connected, but arguably that could be some kind of visualization of Jack's interior sexuality.
Well, I always kind of read it like that, because it's when Wendy first starts to experience the images herself, when she first starts to kind of, I guess you could say, shine herself, and that image represents the depths of Jack's perversity. I mean, it becomes clear to her in a way, and I'm just trying to think the bear, does it have anything to do with nature, with the Indians and how they've demeaned the land, or I don't know.
Yeah, I'll see what Bill has to say about that. Because as we're talking to people, there's some bullet points of some of the most puzzling, intriguing images in the movie, and to get sort of different takes on what each of them could be, it's going to be a really fascinating exercise.
Yeah, we'll just do a whole show just on that one shot.
You probably could do a good half hour.
Yeah.
Jerry, this is fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I wanted to actually go back to something. You bring up, this is all very important what we're talking about, and forgive me, Jamie, for bringing this up, but after the show on Sunday night, we went and watched Inception again.
Mm-hmm.
I have to bring that up in relation to this, just because there's some shots in the movie that remind me so much of The Shining in Inception, but also just about the meaning. And people are so obsessed sometimes with they want a definitive answer from the director, and I'm always so glad that Kubrick never did that, because you're right. It would take you wouldn't want to go back and revisit it, because you're like, okay, it's like a Rubik's Cube, or once you solve it, what's there's nothing really else to do with it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Inception is a great example, and is one of the movies that, like me and Tim, we both have very young kids, so we're often walking in the park with our babies, talking about the themes of genocide in The Shining. Inception is something that's come up a lot, because that's the movie of sort of the day that people are sort of poring over. But I kind of find that most people who talk about Inception are really just trying to talk about the plot itself and some characters' hidden motivations. There's like one, I think, allegorical reading where people talk about it as a statement about the movie-making process.
Yeah.
And similarly in Avatar, which before I saw it, I had read, like in the Drudge Report, a lot about its themes, how it was a play on, the war in the Middle East, which when I saw, it looked pretty clearly that that's what was going on. But then I read that in China, bloggers thought that it was about forced relocation, of villagers who were sort of in the way of a dam. And they didn't think it was a neat coincidence, and something that they could maybe make a point with. But they thought that Cameron was really a student of Chinese politics and had a lot to say about it, which was something I was skeptical about. But I was kind of fascinated, to see, how that movie, what it was about, seemed pretty clear to me. From a different viewer, could have a very different meaning.
Well, you're absolutely right. And actually, when we talked to Cameron, he told us about the kind of the George Bush Iraq connection, but he also said, he also said it's the history of what we do with the indigenous people. We
the Amazon.
take them. Yeah. So it goes across cultures. I can see it read across cultural lines in various ways.
Yeah, so the Chinese thing, it might not have been specifically, about that city and that dam, but it was about that type of forced move, by a strong government that doesn't need to ask permission from anyone.
Let me ask you another question about the Shining. This ending, the alternate ending of the film.
Yeah.
Which, man, that has to be the ultimate, lost ark. if that ending turns up, forget about the 17 minutes of 2001. I want that ending of The Shining. What does that deleted ending illustrate about some of the themes we're exploring in this film? Do you think?
Well, you just cribbed a question that's going to be something we're going to be asking all our interviewers, all the people we're interviewing, is how they fit that into their theories, because this has surfaced fairly recently, I believe, the knowledge of this lost scene, and most people don't address it in the theory, and I'm really interested to see what they do come up with.
Certainly, it suggests that Ullman is more culpable. It emphasizes, I think, Ullman's culpability, whatever Ullman represents, to the viewer, when he shows up with a ball.
Right. And we spoke to someone, can't remember who it was someone that wrote a book on Kubrick. He said that he was there opening weekend and he saw that alternate ending. And so he ran it down for me, and it's, the same explanation that I've read elsewhere. But what fascinated me about one of the explanations that I think Shelley Duvall gave in an interview, she said they worked for like 12 hours straight when Ullman bounces the ball to Danny in the hallway of the hospital. They worked for hours and hours trying to get the ball to bounce perfectly twice before it got to Danny.
Wow. Well,
I'm like, what is that?
I'd have to say at the top of my head, I'd have to say the twins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, or however, whatever layer of doubling we're talking, you find in the movie. Wow.
Yeah, and there's also the whole, and I talked about this with Bill. Whole sins of the father being passed to the son, how he possibly escaped that by retracing Jack's steps in the snow and escaping with his mother. I thought it was kind of a hopeful ending in that respect. But the alternate ending very explicitly implies that he will return to the Overlook himself, that evil will always exist.
Wow. Well, and certainly significantly, in the book, the hotel is destroyed. In the movie, it is not.
I think that it also implies that Ullman, may be one of them, and he has an entire backstory where perhaps he was seduced by the Overlook, just like Jack was.
Mm-hmm. And I think was it Widener that actually talked about that Ullman looks very JFK-ish in the movie?
Yeah, he does. He also notes that there's 2 flags on the desk.
There's
one's
an
an
eagle.
American flag. Yeah, right.
And there's a little toy axe or something in a cup on his desk, I think.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
if I knew that, I forgot it. That's amazing.
When Rodney and I were watching it the other night, there's a tracking shot very early in the film where Danny's brushing his teeth, and as we're going down the hallway, there's all this, there's all these Disney characters stuck on the wall, and that you can make a lot of that. You can get this.
Well, there's a reading of the film that finds Jack's quote of the 3 little pigs really significant, and because of which version of that fairy tale that he used.
Right.
And certainly those fairy tales and the Big Bad Wolf and cartoon themes play a big part in some readings of the film.
And then there's the gentleman that wrote the book on Kubrick and the Holocaust. The book was called The Wolf at the Door.
Yeah, no, I think that's the guy I'm talking about. In particular, he has that. He talks about that Disney version of the 3 Little Pigs, which is the one that Jack just quoted.
Yeah, Jeffrey Cox.
Yes.
He wrote that in 2004. It was called The Wolf at the Door: Cubic History and the Holocaust. He's a professor of history at the Albion College.
Mm-hmm. And we've been in contact with him. We haven't been able to talk to him yet, but.
Oh, interesting.
It sounds like we're going to be retracing your steps.
Let's help each other out here, because we're on the same journey. So this is equally as fascinating to us. There's one other scene that's just a flash, and I wrote about it in between our email correspondences back and forth, and it has to be significant. It's when Jack is there for his interview. And he's sitting out in the waiting room, and they come get him. And he has a magazine in his hand, and he puts it down, and he follows them into the office. It's a split second, but the magazine that he's looking at is a Playgirl, which is completely like, well, why the heck would a Playgirl be there?
Yeah, we've come across that too, and it's amazing. And we're certainly, if you're going to look at the guy in the bear costume, as some kind of literal, some visualization, of Jack's perversity that Wendy sees, that could be another clue pointing to it. What's amazing to me, because we had read about it, recently, and then we had watched it again, for the first time since we read it, last week. What was kind of amazing is how casual he is about it, and he's completely not embarrassed. In fact, he leaves it like face up on the chair in a way that would be incredibly easy for any of the other characters to read.
Which is funny because this is, his new employers,
Right. And there's no way that magazine would be in the waiting room of that lobby. It wouldn't be like Reader's Digest in the lobby of a hotel,
Unless he's saying something about the decadence of the hotel.
Yeah.
Now someone has run with this, and I don't know if you've spoken to him, but he uses it a clue that the abuse that Jack, early on we find out that Jack had, been physically abusive to Danny. But he takes this as a clue that he perhaps had been sexually abusive as well. Have you run across that?
I haven't yet. No.
Well, another clue he points to is there's some pornography in the engine room.
And I was looking for because there's a website that examines The Shining, and they get a close up of the magazine. Do the headlines, because I'm not going to go out and purchase a Playgirl. So, do the headlines say anything about, is there an interview or something in there that says something about the themes of this movie? But I couldn't find anything. Another thing that interests me is the fact that the complaint that a lot of people have about how the movie strays from the book, and it's a problem that I had when I first watched the movie, because I really enjoyed the book. The book is scary because you knew that Jack was capable of this kind of violence from his previous alcoholism, but you felt that he was trying to be a good father and prove himself as a good, loving father, and it was the descent that led to the horror in that story. Whereas just the act of casting Jack Nicholson in the film makes a statement that this guy's a little nuts to begin with.
Yeah, I think this is a place where me and Tim have sort of debated this back and forth a little bit. Tim, you trust Jack an awful lot less at the beginning of this movie than I do, if I'm correct. Because I know when I watch it, every time I watch it, I'm rooting for Jack to get his act together, and to resist the temptation, be a good father, and concentrate on his responsibilities. So I see it as a very tragic story. That Jack is this guy who has had these obstacles and these problems in his life, and he sees this as his last chance to really get his life back together. And clearly it doesn't work, though every time I watch it, I'm rooting for him.
Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm actually waiting for him to go crazy. And let me explain it. When I first saw this, I was pretty young as well, and I guess I probably continue to relate to this film the best as about writer's block or about the creative process. And some of the anguish and isolation that can come from creating. And so, for me, I have a tendency to see Jack's madness as somewhat heroic, in the sense that he's making this sacrifice for his work. That said, now that I have a 2.5-year-old who has the exact same colored hair as Danny, and it's about the exact same length right now, a much different relationship with the film and with rooting for Jack to go as crazy as he does. Mm-hmm. But you have to admit that there's some eloquence in his madness, and that he lacks from earlier in the film.
Well, he just goes more batshit.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to curse, but as the movie goes along, from one level to the next.
Well, another experience we had when we just watched it was looking at Jack as a liar. Mm-hmm. And this was the first time watching it during the interview when he says that Wendy is a real horror movie buff. That we said, no, she's not. He just made that up this second in order to, relieve the tension of this horrible story. There's nothing in this movie that suggests that Wendy has any interest in horror movies. There's not even anything that suggests that he told her about it. When he got back to the house or when he brought her to the hotel, she never says, honey, that murder that happened here freaks me out sometimes. She never mentions it. I don't think he ever told her. And she certainly, when we see her watching a movie, it's the summer of 42. She's not watching Dracula or Frankenstein or Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
And in the car, she gets on to Jack about talking about the Donner Party.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
She's not into it.
And there's also
in that first No, he's lying in that first scene in the interview when he says that she's a real horror movie buff and she'll get a kick out of that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She won't.
He's lying about. Is he lying about how long he's been on the wagon too? Because I think she says a different time period when she's talking to the doctor than Jack says when he's talking to the bartender.
Because when she's talking to the doctor, she seems to imply that they both say 5 months. Is that correct?
I think she says that. He hasn't had any alcohol, and she mispronounces the word alcohol. I remember that in 5 months or something. And then he says, "Here's to 7 miserable months on the wagon," or something when he's talking to the bartender.
I know what it is. He says, "Here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon." Yet at least a month or 2 has passed since Wendy made the statement to the doctor saying it's been 5.
Well, and what's even more significant is that it's been 3 years since he injured Danny's arm. So he didn't quit drinking because of that.
And there's also the fact that the casting of Shelley Duvall, since we've talked about the casting of Nicholson, because in the book, if I remember correctly, he's married to a beautiful blonde, I think, or a beautiful woman. And Shelley Duvall, it's one of the great performances of the 80s, I think. She's astounding in the movie. But she's a frumpier kind of wife than what is portrayed in the book.
Yeah, I was just going to say, even in her wardrobe, she's wearing like these, she's wearing dresses that go down to her ankles, and she's always covered. She's not dressed like a sexy bombshell
right.
in the movie. They dress her in frumpy, farm family, kind of denim hand-me-downs. Well, I guess she's got that one kind of nice, interesting sort of yellow jacket with a kind of like an Indian print on it. In the when she's talking on the ham radio, but no, if the book kind of tries to talks about her, as sort of a bombshell, that's not what they're selling in the movie.
Is it almost his reflection of his own failure as a father, as a writer? It's kind of reflected in her look. I mean, is he bouncing off kind of his sense of failure and disappointment against the image of his wife in a way? I'm trying to figure out why he went that direction with Shelley Duvall instead of
Oh, that she's an anti-trophy wife.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you come across anything like that, Tim?
No. I was just thinking about the violence in the way Jack talks about her to Lloyd, where he calls her a sperm bank upstairs. This is what Rodney and I were talking about. Like, that kind of language just didn't seem like Jack. We were thinking perhaps that's sort of the persona he would put on when he was drinking, sort of a working class guy who, used foul language about his wife.
Or like when Grady, when Grady is talking about Halloran in the bathroom, and he's talking in a very there's that sort of scene where he's coming off in a real racist way that looks like it at first surprises Jack, and then he tries it on for size, which seemed like a real class conscious kind of scene, like somebody who is getting a initiation into a country club, and he's kind of he's a English teacher from Vermont, so he's probably kind of a liberal Democrat guy who would not be comfortable in a conservative / racist, kind of upper snobby country club, but maybe he's got that aspiration, so he's trying it on for size. It's a really weird, interesting scene.
Yeah, and his read on the N-word is just it really does sound like it's the first time he's ever said this word in his life.
When he's talking to Grady in the bathroom? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think one thing I wanted to mention, I know when you were talking about like the Playgirl magazine and the guy in the bear suit, there are a lot of details, that kind of stick out that people want to talk about. But I think what's equally significant, and one of the reasons that the movie sticks with people so much, is not all the unusual things that are put in, but how many major things are left out. Like, for instance, the explanation of the scrapbook. And when we saw it last time, what really struck us was after Jack's experience in room 237, when we see him again entering the apartment, his demeanor has changed radically, and he's again lying to Wendy about what happened. But we never see what made him. Seemingly, he's come to a major decision. There's been a major turning point for him, but it's off camera, which keeps his character really kind of, which keeps him as kind of a puzzle. And I think a lot of these details that have been left out help keep this movie, a puzzle to solve, a mystery to be picked apart.
And you're talking about when he goes into the room and the young woman turns into the old hag and he recoils in horror, and then he goes to Wendy and he says, "No, I didn't see anything," and he seems to be putting on a concerned father face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like what happened between those moments?
Yeah.
Like, another more literal movie, that felt the need to explain everything, would have had him go back to the bar and talk to Lloyd and make some deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that would have sucked the mystery right out of the movie.
Another thing that makes me laugh about the film, actually, I do laugh several times in the film, is the dressing of Halloran's apartment or house. When it cuts to, I look at it, I say, "Are you kidding me?" But there had to have been kind of a, is
those two paintings?
Yes.
Of course they are mirrored. They are. It's another doublet that he's got one on either side of his bed.
I can remember seeing that the first time and just kind of sort of jumping in my seat a little, like, what the hell? Just the character or the moment? It's a really jarring moment.
Yeah, I could just see the set dresser saying, "You want me to do what? You want me to put up what? Are you kidding me?"
He scouted some prop warehouse, and one of those paintings was in the corner of the frame, and Stanley said, "Wait a minute, let me see that one." Really? I didn't think you. Is there another one like it? There's got to be two. But there's so many moments with Halloran in that last section. The play really, really funny. I know every time I see this with a couple of people, when Halloran has landed at the airport and he calls his friend up looking for the snowcat, and he's like, "What are you doing back? What are you doing back in Colorado?" Oh, the people who are watching the hotel turned out to be real assholes. Like, that always brings the house down. Like, it's like after all this after so much, supernatural and psychological mayhem has been going on, to reduce it to asshole, it's like crass understatement that just resonates with the crowd and brings the house down.
And there's a scene where I think it's during that phone conversation, and the other actor's Tony Burton, I think is his name, and he's at the car shop or wherever it is he works. I forget who pointed this out, but there's major continuity issues in the shot with Tony Burton, where the placement of something on the desk, it varies wildly from take to take, but it's so obvious it's almost like it's intentional.
Well, I guess I need to watch that scene again. I know.
Me too.
Yeah, likewise.
What are some of your other laugh moments, Jamie? I'd be interested to know.
Well, I always laugh when when she runs in and she's crying, it's more a delivery of the line. She's saying there's a woman that tried to hurt Danny in one of the rooms, and he looks at her and he says, "Are you out of your fucking mind?" It's just the reading of the line. I always laugh out loud at that reading. But the kind of extreme nature of his behavior makes me laugh, and I think it delighted Kubrick too. I mean, he was obviously looking for a kind of a Cagney-esque, over the top performance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't think Kubrick gets enough credit for being very funny. Eyes Wide Shut, the scene with Tom Cruise and Alan Cumming in the hotel. Mm-hmm. It's just is very funny, as well as the costume shop. I know earlier today, thinking as I was thinking about our conversation, I was rolling around in my head who are Kubrick's successors, and the first couple of people I thought of I discounted because they just weren't funny at all. Mm.
Mhm. You're right.
I thought, I was thinking of Enter the Void. And I said there are things that are maybe a little Kubrick-like in that film, although it's visually way too complicated. Plus, it's not funny at all.
Well, Jerry and I actually we talk about that. We've talked about that before on the show, Jerry. Who do we see Kubrick in? And a lot of people say Chris Nolan just because of the kind of the intellect and the technology.
The other one who I was did some research today, actually, not actually related to this interview, but just Paul Thomas Anderson worships Kubrick.
Paul Thomas Anderson, I would go with, because he gets those the first thing you think of in a Kubrick film, actually, after a few iconic images, are just really strong characters. Lee Ermey in Full Metal Jacket, Jack in The Shining, Hal in 2001. And in P.T. Anderson's movies, Tom Cruise in Magnolia to even Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love, which is like a performance that he gets performance out of Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love that I've never seen out of that guy. He also has a very similar...
We might never see again, it looks like.
Yeah.
Let me read you...
We don't see that in Grown Ups.
Yeah. No, Grown Ups is the Barry Lyndon of its day. Let me... There are two Kubrick quotes here that I found earlier I'd like to read to you, that Paul Thomas Anderson says. And he said, "We're all children of Kubrick, aren't we? Is there anything you can do that he hasn't done?" And then there's a second one. Let me see if here. "It's so hard to do anything that doesn't owe some kind of debt to what Stanley Kubrick did with music in movies. Inevitably, you're going to end up doing something that he's probably already done before. It always seems like we're falling behind whatever he came up with. Singing in the Rain and A Clockwork Orange. That was the first time I became so aware of music in movies. So no matter how hard you try to do something new, you're always following behind."
And he turned us down for an interview.
Well, he's probably adapting Inherent Vice because he's under the gun, man. Because the other movies fell apart.
I know.
No, Kubrick's use of music. And what's funny, he does things, with counterpoint in music, that no one does. But often, if he uses a track, it's kind of over. You've got, Thus Spake Zarathustra in 2001, and now it's as married to the film as the Star Wars theme.
Yeah.
If anyone uses it for any purpose, it's always a callback to 2001. He uses it once, and it's owned. And I was thinking about P.T. Anderson and Kubrick, and I think I think maybe a major difference between them, though, is Paul Thomas Anderson. His films are really about places, like the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, or in Boogie Nights or in Magnolia. But The Shining Kubrick's films are more about like the rooms that they take place in. Like the Overlook Hotel is a very, very real place, that I can imagine falling asleep and waking up in. but it's not really about Colorado.
No,
you know?
That's
right.
true.
And I think I was just rolling it around. Nobody has got, if there are 5 or 6 things, that are distinctive about Kubrick, from his visual sensibility to how he uses music to the kind of characters that emerge to his sense of humor, nobody has all of them.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of people share a couple of things, because every serious, filmmaker has studied the films and learned and taken a few things away. I don't know of anyone.
We're stuck. We have only one Kubrick, and we should be happy with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of directors though, like P.T. Anderson, or even Richard Kelly with The Box. There's a lot of The Shining and that in 2001, but there is only one Kubrick. No one really has. There's no one alive I can think of, or no one before him or after him that has that combination of things. It's just.
I always saw Kubrick in that Barry Levinson movie Sphere, which is a very cryptic movie in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's true.
It almost sounds like when Dustin Hoffman discovers the multiple copies of books in the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sounds like he's using one of the same musical themes from Kubrick's The Shining.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where you see the elevator of blood and it's kind of prickly violin chords.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another movie I got to go back and explore.
Well, there's a lot of Shining in 2001 in Matthew Barney's Cremaster cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But those movies don't unspool as effortlessly as Kubrick's.
Well, my theory on Inception is that Christopher Nolan set out to make a film that people would talk about as much as The Shining.
That could be, and they are.
It could be. I mean, I watched it again. Like I said, and I have on the second viewing, my interpretation of the film is completely different from the first time. So, go figure.
But you know something? The first time you watch The Shining, you don't think this is confusing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not necessarily aware that there's something there to figure out.
True.
No, you're just dragged into it.
Yeah.
Well, in dragging, it's actually a really, I don't know, for me, a really powerful word. When I snuck into the movie when I was a kid and ran out of the theater before the interview was over. But I think I think the reason that movie scared me so much is those, sort of dolly tracking shots, the way they pull you to the hotel. The trailer, I knew that as mild as, that opening interview scene was, that we were in store, for some very nasty surprises. And I think something about the way the camera pulls you forward is sort of dragging you towards that horror. And I kind of wanted to dig in my heels and not get carried towards it. But, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop the force, of the momentum of the film.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, but it is incredibly addictive. I can remember, in the basement of my dorm freshman year, just watching this thing over and over on Cinemax late at night, and having conversations with whoever dropped by about it and about what I thought it was about, and what I discovered on that latest viewing. And it's amazing just how much it can grab you like that.
It's a rabbit hole. I mean, as is all of Kubrick's work. I mean, you will. I feel kind of like Jim Garrison in JFK, that this is something that goes deeper and deeper, and I'm never going to get out of it.
A riddle wrapped in an enigma, et cetera.
That's what it is.
You'll be lost in the maze.
Well, once you guys crack The Shining, it's on to Eyes Wide Shut. You'll need to explain that one to me too. Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining are actually my two favorite Kubrick movies, and The Shining is just recently, since I've kind of investigated like you guys are, the various interpretations of it. It just recently became one of my all-time favorite Kubrick movies.
No, I think Eyes Wide Shut is kind of an underrated film. Though I know every once in a while I'll see another film and I'll realize that Eyes Wide Shut might have drawn some inspiration from it. Like there was an Italian, a Giallo film called The Short Night of Glass Dolls, which in which like a reporter has been poisoned in a way that has frozen and paralyzed, and the whole movie unfolds from his point of view seemingly as a corpse. And he has this one horrible night that concludes in like this satanic orgy, that whose members wind up being influential, people from society, which may have been something that was part of his research, or maybe just an interesting coincidence. But I also saw, I saw echoes of Beyond the Green Door, that psychedelic 70s porno movie.
I can see that too, because actually Eyes Wide Shut had its origins. Obviously, there was Trom Novell, but there's also the Terry Southern screenplay called Blue Movie, about a respected director that makes a pornographic film that Kubrick was thinking about doing, not long after 2001 or Strangelove, I think.
Well, yeah,
That's cool.
I read Blue Movie, and I think the director's name is Stanley, and like maybe Terry Southern was really hoping that after their collaboration on Strangelove, he'd be able to get him to go for this one. So if he was considering it, he clearly must have screened, what were the more ambitious adult films of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that one even ends on a similarly weird, like kind of upbeat note, where the woman finds out that I think the masked figure was her husband all along.